Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another live stream. And I see some of your comments. You wanting to know, is this the live stream? Yeah, it is a live stream. Back in the old days, on TV, when things didn't work quite correctly, they would always say, due to technical reasons, we are the next program won't happen. So in the background, we've had a few little technical issues. But everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be good. So I just wanted to, first of all, do my usual. Thank you very much. Hi, Chris, Leslie, Tommy, Kim, and all. Thanks. Darby wants to know, is there anybody there? There is now. Yes, we're here. And we're here for the next hour. So hi, Jason, as well. Thanks very much for being here. Now, I'm going to do my usual routine. I just want to double check over on the Getaverse that we're streaming okay. I also wanted to say, by the way, that tonight is the comedy night over on Getter. So I know some people may be watching that. So my best wishes to everybody who chooses to watch the Getter live or the Getter comedy. Interestingly enough, by the way, for those who are at the Getter comedy night, I hate to break it to you, but in the intermission, you're going to be given a couple of little video clips, and one of them's from me. So if you're laughing now, you won't be laughing then. So anyway, I hope you all have a great night. To Jason and all the gang, and Peter and guys. As I said, it's a great night. I'd be there, except that London is a little bit of a distance from me. Although I will be in London at the weekend. So yeah. So that being said, we are where we are, and what I wanted to chat about. I mean, there's always so much to talk about. Always so much to talk about. I hope you noticed that on the new site we've launched, davidvance.net, there's a new article from myself up there today, basically flagging up that I believe that this British government is reversing us out of Brexit, reversing us back into the European Union. So there's an article there which I think we can actually flash up and let you see it. Yeah, somewhere, but it's definitely there. We have return to the EU. Yeah, yeah. Actually, there's two good articles there. Return to the EU. You should give it a read. You should also read the one about Pinnacle massaging the vaccine numbers. But return to the EU, and you want to. Well, you can read it for yourself when you got time. We've got a guest. I don't want to keep our guest waiting, but there is that, and there's one about the Pinnacle recording system that the NHS uses to record COVID deaths. This Pinnacle recording system, turns out, is absolutely open to abuse. Now, I'm sure there would never be any abuse of such a system to inflate numbers. I'm sure, definitely not. But just in case you think there might be, go and give it a listen on the podcast channel. So, yeah. Hi, John. Yeah, all you guys. I'm just listening to Sean Ahern here. Dust off those mother-in-law jokes. Northern Monkey says he missed me on Hearts of Oak. Yet to watch, expect was lively. Well, do you know the best thing about the Hearts of Mine thing I did on Saturday night was the very you should watch the last 5 minutes of it. Don't bother with the other 55 minutes, but the last 5 minutes had me in tears of laughter. And Peter Michael Venna as well, as we did play the singing efforts of let me get this right. It was a Brazilian trans mute giving he, his, her, its version of Whitney Houston's "I Will Always Love You." And if for nothing else, I should be remembered for sharing that with the world. Anyway, listen, that's enough. That's enough of those, or the preliminary. Look, in the past week or so, we've had the ludicrous COP27 farce down in Bali. Where else? And we've all the shenanigans around that. We had Rishi Sunak stroke Jeremy Hunt's budget, a horrific budget. We saw that, and the whole issue of climate sort of hangs over all of this. And you get so much nonsense spoken about climate, so much hysteria spoken about climate. When I hear all these issues being discussed, there's one gentleman who I turn to. I follow his output over on YouTube, and to me, he is a voice of rare sanity, and someone, of course, that you should all listen to, because I think he basically steers us where we need to be. He's been on the platform before, and as I said, we have had a few tech issues, but he's here with us this evening. So without any further ado, can I please introduce to you my special guest tonight, Mr. Paul Burgess.
Hi everyone.
Hello, Paul. Good to see
Hi.
you, and thanks for being here. Do you know, Paul? I mean, what I was saying there is just how I feel about it. The issue of climate, the issue of the net zero, all of this stuff, it's couched in the language of hysteria.
Yes.
And the media, which you and I have talked about before, the media, they don't really analyze it. They just propagate it, I think. And so, Paul, I love to listen to your stuff because it's always reasonable. It's always anchored in facts, and it provides to me, and I'm sure to many others, that much needed balance, because I feel we're being driven over like lemmings over a cliff edge by these lunatics, especially with net zero. Now, to start off with, Paul, shall we play a little video clip, which was, I believe, it's Paul Burgess's if you were in charge of everything, 2-minute budget response. Isn't that correct?
Correct. And I knew the budget was coming out that day, and it's a very quick video. I haven't done it to my normal standards, as it were, but I thought, I just had to do something to make me feel better because the budget was so bad. Yeah. And what they're doing is they're putting their own virtue signaling, spending your money above you. What matters to them is they can slap each other on the back. They can go around the world giving our money away. And the cover for all this, as you said, is climate change. Climate change. And it's an excuse. It is purely an excuse. You'll see it. So I just made this very quick on the day of the budget, just so I could go to sleep that night.
Well, this is entertaining. So Paul and I will sit back, you watch this, and then we're going to come back in and we're going to talk. There's so many questions.
It's only 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes. If we can just play this, that would be great. So.
In 2019, the Committee for Climate Change estimated that the total cost of getting to net zero would be £50 billion per year, less than 1% of the projected GDP for that period. The Treasury and the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the BEIS, put the figure at £70 billion per year, or over £1 trillion by 2050. I think we can safely ignore the £50 billion a year from the Committee for Climate Change, because that same committee also predicted that by 2021 electric vehicles would on average cost about £13,000 and would be cheaper than internal combustion cars. That committee is completely out of touch with reality. So let's accept the Treasury and business view of £70 billion a year. Today, the Chancellor is looking to save about £50 billion a year, they call the black hole. Well, my budget is very simple. Drop net zero, save £70 billion a year, and drop something that's making no difference to the world whatsoever. All the COP meetings, as you can see by this graph, make no difference to the CO2. China alone, never mind India or the rest, has emitted more CO2 into the atmosphere than the UK has since the Industrial Revolution. CO2 is now being emitted at 2.5 times the rate it was emitted 30 years ago. All of this makes no difference. We are now under 1% of the world's emissions, and that's my budget. Very simple. I could go a lot further than that, but that is just the start and is a bigger saving than what the Chancellor is attempting today. And by the way, the £70 billion a year cost is a big underestimate of the true cost.
So there we have it. Chancellor Burgess there giving us his I mean,
Believe me, there's
yeah,
lots more I'd like to do than just drop net zero, believe me. But in actual fact, that 70 billion, just to put it in perspective, the energy industry came up with treble that, 210 billion,
mm,
and costing about 3 trillion. But they don't count all the costs. So they really don't count all the costs. And it's impossible to do anyway. The practicalities of it all are totally impossible in every possible way. It is absolutely absurd. And
yeah, but Paul, the government is committed. Rishi Sunak, all of them are absolutely committed, and actually not just the UK government. Over in the States, the
yeah,
Biden administration, same.
correct.
It's an article of faith, Paul. We've got to get now. You were the last one of the things you and I spoke about is busting the myths really, and the first myth, of course, is that we don't need to get to net. We need more CO2. We don't
Correct.
need less CO2.
Yeah.
So I think at that point their argument falls over dead anyway, and
Yeah.
everything from there on in is just pure
Yeah.
flim flam.
Yeah, if I can explain this, we did prepare tonight about 20 slides so I could go through things in sequence, but they've all been jumbled up. I don't mind, by the way, playing them, and I'll just reference them as they're played and tell you the story behind each one. And that may be something worthwhile doing, actually. But
Yeah.
I mean, it is a cult. It's a cult, and it's a cult without any foundation in reality. It really is. I mean, on what world do we listen to Greta when she was 15 or something, who admits she has no science, who hasn't even read the papers, who admits she doesn't have science behind her, who admits there's no big scare, she was just sort of pretending. Yeah. And what world do we allow a little kid to come in and meet everybody in the world, all the leaders in the world, for a scare story? That is ridiculous. My grandkid was in Bristol and was asked to go to the Greta Day. She came to Bristol, and the mother said, "Fine, explain what she's wanting, explain what she's saying, and you can go." But the girl, the 13-year-old, couldn't. So she didn't go. Thank goodness. But that's what we're in. Well, it's a cult, and what I do is I try. If I'm just finishing off a video now, which is one of my best, I think, and what it does is it goes into history, and it goes in and shows. They claim, for example, that the Little Ice Age was local in the Northern Hemisphere a bit, and the global warming period was local. So I go around the world and I go to the equatorial glaciers in Venezuela. I go to Chile, right down South America, Argentina. I go across to South Africa, and then I nip down to New Zealand, giving you all the evidence of both the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age from scientific papers. Yes?
Yeah.
So we know it was round the world. We know that. Now, once that's accepted, why they fight it so hard, once that's accepted, then what we've got is a global warming all by itself without man doing anything, up to 3 degrees hotter than today, according to the New Zealand study in the medieval warm period. And then without man doing anything, it cools down to the Little Ice Age, and then it picks up again. So you've got these natural cycles. And so whilst I totally accept that CO2 by man has contributed to the warming of this last century, I totally accept that. I then looked for the reason why it would be warming. And we already know about the solar, the solar minimums and the Maunder minimum and all that. But then I found a professor in Northumbrian University, and she really did pin it down. She actually looked at what they were using for radiation, and what they were using was the same per square meter radiation all the time. Well, it ain't like that, the sun, right? It really is not. And one of the biggest factors in the sun, and I go into this in my video, I explained it very simply in the video with animations, is this. We actually don't revolve exactly around the sun, right? We actually revolve around a center of mass. If you've got a planet here and you've got the sun, they both pull each other. And the center you revolve around is near to the sun because that's the biggest one, but it's actually outside it. And the sun is revolving around that as well. So the sun, now imagine all the planets now in this, and the path of the sun is all zigzagging all over the place. And you can mathematically calculate where it is. So, and this makes an enormous difference because just the wobbles of the sun move the sun closer. That's it. In fact, he's just found it. On the bottom left-hand corner there, you'll see that's in 2 dimensions. In actual fact, it's in 3 dimensions. On the bottom left-hand corner there with the sun, that's the path of the sun. And the distances change just due to the wobble. So she calculated how much this affects the radiation and so on. And 60% of the change since the Industrial Revolution is down to the sun. 40% is down to all the other factors, and there are other factors, not just CO2. So CO2 has contributed, yes. Now, what I do in the video, I do it so I'm hoping an 8-year-old child can understand it, and explain it. So what happened to her? When she came up with this idea, she was attacked, and they had a paper withdrawn from Science magazine. They caused the editor to withdraw the paper. So what she went back and did the whole thing in great detail for the last 2,000 years. So exact is she on the mathematics of this, that it shows that in the Roman warm period, which she also covered, there was a 30-year period when it went very cold very quickly, a 30-year period. And the Romans had to stop advancing. There was too much snow. They couldn't move. So they really were cold. And this mathematical model is not a future one like the alarmists do. It's the past, looking at it, predicts, it shows you why this happened. Now, the bad news is this. She's now predicting we're going to have a very cold period in the next 30 to 40 years. That we're entering now cold. And there is some evidence of this. And I was going to start my talk today with a shot of the Arctic ice in 2012 and the Arctic ice in 2013 when it grew enormously.
We have it. We actually, I think we have that image there. I just seen it, Paul, flashing up. Here we go.
Right, there we are. Now, if I was an alarmist, I'd say, look at this. Alarmist the other way. Or if I was trying to fight the alarmist, I'd say in 2012, the ice was like that. 1 year later, at the same time, look at it. 533,000 square miles in a year added. But that would be using their tactics. That is not climate. That is weather. That's what it is. It's weather. And so I was starting my talk with that. I think we can do it this way, actually. I start my talk with that to say, and I end the talk with it, by the way, because that shows you how you can deceive people. If I wanted to show the Arctic, I'd have to show, in this case, I've done it on video, I'd have to show, believe it or not, something like 100 years to get the pattern. Because what the alarmists did was they took the 1979 high figure after the 70s Ice Age comet scare and then showed you the decline. But if you'd gone back to the 50s, it was much lower and then back up again and so on. So you see the whole cycle. Anyone can take part of a cycle, a little part, and then say, look at this, it's going up or it's going down. But if you come out and look at the wider picture, and that's what climate is. And years ago, when I made my first video, I predicted, and I wasn't aware of anything else at the time, that we were moving into a phase of extreme weather alarmism. We're not in climate change anymore. We're in extreme weather alarmism. So you've got people like Rishi Sunak on the world stage at COP saying, look at the floods. We've got to pay for the floods in Pakistan. But if you look back on the floods in Pakistan, they were worse in the past. And I've got news. I'm 77, but I've got news for people. We are in a very benign climate. In fact, the disasters are far worse. So I took droughts. One of my videos took droughts in the UK. And I'm an expert at that one because I was water resource engineer for Wales. And I look back on it, give all the science, but the history, and all the worst droughts were like 16, 17, 1800s. Yes, right. And I list the modern ones like the 76 one. And I was water resource engineer for Wales in 76 when that happened. So, I give all this. And then I go to the Department of Environment because the engineers and people I knew that back then weren't dishonest in any way. And lo and behold, the recent report by the government, environment committee, by the environmentalists there, backed up what I'd said, that there's nothing going on special with droughts. Yes. So when you do, that's what I try to do. I try to link it all together to give you a whole picture. Now, this scientist, this Valentina, she got attacked personally very badly. And what she did was go back and do the 2,000 years in great detail mathematically, and they couldn't argue with that. So that's it. They just don't respond then. So it goes quiet then. So people don't argue with me very much. I get a few people on my YouTube channel who give about 200 points, a huge long thing, which is impossible to answer properly because I can't give them graphs in the posts and so on. But I've asked them to raise 1 point at a time, and I answer every comment on that YouTube channel. So,
you do. Yeah, you do.
And I've got nothing to hide. You know, my philosophy is science, which is if I'm wrong, I'd rather find out I'm wrong than carry on being ignorant. So that's what it's about.
Well, I think we actually do have your slides sitting down below, so we can bring them up. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you a question about, coming out of the Bali COP27. I mean, there was all kinds of just nonsense. But it seems to be a sort of an agreement now that the West has to pay for its sins of gifting the world the Industrial Revolution. And that means a transfer of wealth from us to every on-the-make, opportunistic third world or distant land that we can imagine. And it appears that the British government is reasonably okay with that.
Well, what agree to the principle.
But what did you think of this whole?
Well, first of all, the industrial. First of all, if you look, and I've published a graph of the climate deaths, or climate fatalities in the world, and they're negligible now. The graph is almost a straight line down. Yes. So today the humanity is suffering far less than climate than it ever has in history. So that's number one. Number two is the Industrial Revolution. Well, you've got medicine now in those worlds, that medicine, you've got transport, you've got all sorts of scientific help, all sorts of industrial help, which has improved the world considerably. And in fact, they should be paying us, if you want to go onto a moral basis, for what we helped with. So to say that we have done CO2 in the air as if it's all we've done. Let's go to Africa and let's go to the world of data on the internet. World of data, anyone can do it. Look up the record crops in Africa. We have today world record crops, and the scientists are saying 2/3 of that is due to CO2. So are they going to pay us for the extra crops? Are they going to pay us for all the extra things? No. Well, and actually poverty has been reducing and reducing and reducing in the world. I'm all for helping underdeveloped countries. I'm all for helping them, but you help them by giving them the tools to help themselves and grow, as it were. That's what you do. And of course, I've got proof today that our last 30 years of government have been wrong, because look, today we are trying to build a nuclear power as fast as we can, but we stopped it. In fact, I've got a graph showing it's down to 2 gigawatts. It'll be by the next 2 years. Yes. And in fact, one of the videos I did recently, I uncovered that I learned myself in doing the research, and it was much worse than I thought, the policy. So as regards this COP idea of giving money that way, it's just an excuse to transfer wealth from the developed countries to the underdeveloped countries. And very often, by the way, that money doesn't make it to anyone on the ground.
No, it's yeah.
So the idea, the concept that Russia has just accepted, and he actually named the Pakistani flood without looking back in history at the Pakistani floods and how many died. Far more people died from a flood in the past than died now. Yes. And by the way, there's another factor in it. The biggest deforestation going on in that Asian area is by Pakistan. And if you deforest a catchment, you haven't got the retention of water. So you get a bigger peak of water, a flood. In other words, trees help dampen out floods. But they've been deforesting really incredibly. So you see, there's other factors to take into account. And what I do is just look at the facts on the real world. And everyone runs away from me, David. Nobody wants to argue with me. And I'd love to have a discussion. I mean, I've tried it with
I know.
I've tried it. They all run away. And I'm not scared. To the point, and I'm going to name some names now, to the point when the producer tried to get me to go on the Palladium against a professor. It was Lawrence Krauss. And he was quite famous in other areas. He's a physicist.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book which was the #1 non-fiction seller at the time. I did the interview with him on Zoom. That the meeting of the Zoom was to establish, can we go ahead with this? Because the producer's going to sell the tickets in London and have a big debate.
I know. Yeah.
And that was, he said he didn't never heard of the hockey stick, which is the whole foundation of alarmism. That's like saying to a mechanic, have you ever heard of petrol? No. I mean, I'm saying it. And then he brings another professor on, and then we end up, the two professors wanted to go against me alone. So I was happy with that, because the truth is all I've got. Happy with that. But then they wanted to produce it as well and control it. And that I couldn't accept it. I needed an independent person in charge of it. So that's how bad it is that people run away, And I'm crazy.
But this is what happens in a cult, and I think already there, Paul, some moments ago, you made a really sort of stark and telling point regarding the amount of CO2 that the UK has emitted since the start of the Industrial Revolution versus that which China has emitted.
China's in 8 years, between 2012 and 2020, 8 years, they've emitted more than we've admitted since 1850.
Yeah, I mean, listen, folks, that blows me away, because clearly that is, I mean, that is known, Paul, isn't it? I mean, that's not a secret.
No, that's a fact. Now, it's even worse than that, really, because then you've got to add on India, and so if you add on India and then the other countries doing the big producers of CO2, you end up actually with it more like 4 years. So in 4 years, that world's putting more. Now, if they were going to be so injured by the CO2, well, they ought to stop doing that, shouldn't they? Because why claim compensation? And by the way, this Rishi Sunak thing also applied to China. So it applied to giving money to China, because in the past, somehow, we've got the guilt of modernizing the world, as it were, and stopping disease and all the other things we help prevent, minimize and so on. And we reduce poverty in the world. The system reduced poverty, but it seems to be more bound in with the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and this madness of no one knowing anything. And you'll be happy, you'll be down there as minions while we fly around the world in private jets. And the other thing, they're in Bali this year, or they're in Bali. Why aren't they in Gateshead? Why aren't they in places like Gateshead? It's always quite a nice place to go. And I was quite shattered when I found out that just one Western country, was sending 231 delegates. There isn't just a few people go, it's hundreds of them. There's thousands there.
Well, I have to say, I remember a long time ago, I went to Bali for my honeymoon as opposed to Gateshead, and I still think that was a good decision. Gateshead. I think my wife probably would have preferred Bali, but yeah, you're right. I mean, Paul, the issue is here. It's a staggering hypocrisy, but it's worse. It's worse than hypocrisy. Now, there's a couple of charts I wanted to bring up, and you can maybe talk us through. If we could go to not this one, the next one. Yeah, here's a chart which I think we're going to just bring up on screen, and it kind of asks. I mean, the fundamental question is: has the world warmed? So, Paul, what's the answer?
Okay, the world has warmed since 1850 by just over 1 degree centigrade. Yeah, it may not sound much, but you actually, when you go back to what the alarmists, by the way, are wanting to return to the Little Ice Age. They're wanting to return when we had low crops and everything else. They want to go back to this because this was wonderful life when there weren't the crops, when this growing season was shorter and everything else. There was low food. And there wasn't the CO2 for the plants to breathe. But if you look at this chart, this is taken from satellite measurements. And since 2016, there's actually been a slight reduction, actually. But basically, if you just take the right-hand side of the chart from 2016, well, actually, even further back than that, it really has stopped. Those bumps are just normal cycles. You get the El Nino ocean currents like Nina and all those affecting it. But basically, it hasn't warmed for 8 years. But this tallies in with the paper I've just been dealing with from Valentina and this lady up in the Northumberland University, because she's shown a number of things that are happening. I mean, the United States afternoons and evenings have been cooling now for a long time, and they really are. And we've got ice in places now that we didn't have before. I'm very loath to do too many of those because that's doing what the alarmists do. And
Yeah.
I've got to regard isolated things like the ice cap I showed you as weather. I can't regard that as climate. Climate is, you have to have a long-term pattern,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you study it. So if you're going to look at Pakistan floods, look at the long term. But no, they don't. Either they're stupid or they're evil, I'm afraid, because
Mm.
if they're saying these things
Yeah.
without checking them, make up your minds. Make up your minds. But so, and I have people saying to me, well, I had someone just recently saying, well, what are your qualifications? I said, it doesn't matter. If you, I've got a Master of Science and all that, and so on, and I've been in charge of a country's water resources planning and all that, but it doesn't matter. And I say, well, if you're going to do that, which is an appeal to authority, as it were,
Yeah.
put me in the same club as Einstein, who was a patent agent when he came up with the theory of relativity. Put me in with Stephen Hawking, who really pushed away at the Big Bang instead of the steady state. Yes. So consensus doesn't exist in science.
That's right.
It just doesn't exist. And now I'll give you an example. Now we've got the new Watts telescope up, and we're looking further into the past than ever. Whilst it doesn't stop the Big Bang Theory by any means, what it does show is our model for the creation of galaxies, early creation, was wrong. We already know that. So science now have to scramble all that and come up with something to explain it. That's how science works. That's science. The further away science gets away from government, the better it is. But when it's near government, when science is near to government like climate, it is political. It's not climate. One of the rules of the IPCC is that any report, any paper that goes against basically the consensus has to be dismissed. I've published this in the video. And the recent video gives you the actual rules, which isn't out yet. It's out next week. It gives you the actual rules of it, where they actually ban any discrepancy from the theme. Yes. And the people who write the report, which is the summary report for policymakers, which all the governments read, are purely politicians. And they can override the scientists, no problem at all. Yeah. Every sentence is agreed with a red light or a green light as they work through it. And by the way, all the votes come from the third world countries. Everyone's got the same vote. So we're outnumbered, and it's all about a transfer of wealth to them.
It absolutely is. You also, Paul, it's a really interesting bit of information you've pulled together on, we've mentioned this mini ice age, and I see some of our viewers are mentioning it as well. We've got a chart here which shows what happened after the mini ice age, and maybe you'd like to talk us through that.
I'd like to talk about that. Yeah, I can talk about that. What this lady did in Northumbria University was if you look at the blue line, that the top line's are temperatures, as they claim. Never mind, they fiddle it a bit, but never mind. Let's accept the temperatures. The blue line, which is the radiation from the sun, was pretty well in line up to that point, up to the middle there. Pretty well in line. You could almost draw two straight lines. I know there's bumps, but and suddenly the temperature took off, and the radiation leveled out and then declined. Yes, what's happening? So that was the question that this got this scientist to ask why. And then she found out that the wobble of a star caused by its planets is well known. That's how we look into space and say, do the stars have planets? We've known that for a few decades. So, and if the star wobbles, it's being wobbled by a planet, yes, or planets. And we can even tell when we work out the motion of that, we can tell normally how many planets they've got.
Yeah.
So this discrepancy caused this lady to look at it, and she was shocked. They actually then use the same radiance all year, every time, every year, going back hundreds of years. No, it doesn't work like that. There's actually, besides the 11-year sun cycle we know about, there's actually a 2,200-year cycle and another one which is around about 450 years. So there's other cycles. And when you put all these together, that's when you can find, oh, well, there's the Roman warm period. Oh, yeah, there's a medieval warm period. Oh, there's a 30-year sudden cooling because the how can I put it? But the waves interfere with each other and so on. So you get an overall effect. So this particular graph was the start of my new video, basically. It's the start of why did that happen. Any good scientist would ask that and so on. But there's another paper I've done on the sun, which shows that the sun is 4, 5, 6 times more powerful as regards the climate than the alarmists assume. And that they held back that paper from being published in Nature, I think it was published. They held it back for 2 years saying the maths were wrong. but they agreed when it was too late for COP26, and it came out 2 weeks after COP26. Everything's political.
Yeah.
And so I've now published 2 videos. I will have published, by the time I publish this one, 2 videos on this. And I'm quoting the papers. I'm quoting the scientists. I'm not inventing it all. And you can almost show any of my slides now as you work through them, because I can talk about each one, or you can have questions.
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, let's just bring up, and there's another. I mean, there's so much interesting content here. This one sounds very complicated. Make it simple for everybody, please, Paul.
Well, basically, there's a better one than this. I'd rather go because to explain what I want to explain, it's a sensitivity of CO2
right. Okay. Let me see here. I like charts. I like charts. I've got a chart there. Here's a chart. Bring it up. Hopefully.
Oh, great. This one is the UK nuclear capacity. This is our marvellous governments. And I'm not blaming the Conservatives alone. I'm blaming Labour's even worse. The Greens are even worse. And the SNP is even worse. I mean, you can't imagine getting worse than our current government, but they are. But the current government is so bad, it's going to cripple us all. Nevertheless, this is the nuclear power and what we had and what we've done away with. And actually, as you can see, the light coloured blue is just what's being planned now to try and recover it. But by 2030, we're down to 2 gigawatts of.
Well, how are we going to work with 2?
I want to make another big point here. You do realise they're sitting there as prime ministers and energy ministers. What they said was, we don't like fossil fuels. So for base load, which is a 24-hour-a-day load, which was nuclear, coal and things, we're going to do away with clean nuclear and we're going to replace it with gas. Because the video I made last week showed you that the more wind you have, the more gas you need. So what shattered me was when you go into the 26, there's a curve of demand I've done in that lot. But if you go into it, the base load now is wind. Well, you can't have a base load of wind because it's often not there. And you can only replace it with gas because that's the only thing that quickly comes in, right? So I've done the economics and the video is called No One's Doing the Maths. And to give you some example of this, to have batteries to cover the 9 days without wind we had in 2018, and that's not the worst case because 3 weeks with low wind could be worse. But I just took the 9 days so everyone could understand it. And the world's largest battery for stores, 1.6 gigawatts. That's in California, America. And the cost of that to do the 9 days is $12 to $24 trillion, right? Which, that's just to get the battery. Worse than that. What it goes on to say is worse than that. The battery doesn't last that long, right? So it's not possible. It's not possible to use batteries. It's not possible to use hydrogen. Hydrogen takes 3 times more energy. You have to put 3 kilowatts in to get the 1 kilowatt out. And so where are you getting this from? And by these policies like Labour, and I don't know about Russia, he's all over the place on wind, but Labour is saying treble the wind. If you do that, you've just got more wind pylons standing there idle when the wind stops. Now, you've got to have even more gas. For every wind turbine you put up, you've got to have the gas. And that, by the way, is the energy storage facility in California, right? And let's look at this. To do the 9 days, you need 5,400 megawatt hours. So to replace the lack of wind in the 9 days, you need 5,400 megawatt hours. This gives us 1.6. And it gives it a 0.4. It lasts 4 hours. 4 hours it'll run and I'd give you 0.4 an hour. And we're looking, so total, there's 2 things. When you buy electricity, you buy a kilowatt hour. I know we call it a kilowatt, but it's a kilowatt hour. So I'm paying 33 pence a kilowatt hour. But the rate, so there's 2 things that matter. If you take a pump storage scheme, right, such as de Norwich, it's got 9.1 gigawatt hours and it outputs at 1.74 gigawatts. So it'll run for about 6 hours at that rate. That's the maximum you can get out. So it's a waste of time just adding up the storage because people say, oh, well, you can only get 1 minute and 20 seconds to run. If you run batteries in Europe to do the EU, You've only got a minute and 20 seconds of all the batteries together do that. And that's wrong, because all they've done is added up the capacity. They haven't added up how big the hole is, the capacity coming out, the rate. And if you do that, it's zero. It's zero. And we haven't got, our backup storage in this country from anything like pump storage and that, in effect, we can't back up the grid for even 1 second. We can't back it up. And the policy of going dropping nuclear has seen us use more gas. So to say that, we get our gas from Norway at the moment, most of our gas, but Norway's had a bad season on drying out on their reservoirs for the hydroelectric. So they may want to use more gas. So they've warned us we may not be able to get as much this winter. Yes. Now put that together with this lady, and this scientist who's saying we're into a really bad 30 years now. We've started it already, and we're into a bad 30 years where we're going to get colder and colder. So the rest of my lifetime, whatever it is, I'm 77 now, I won't make it that far, but the rest of my lifetime is going to be cold according to this science, right? But no one argues with their maths. No one argues with the last 2,000 years, which he checks it against. They don't do that. What they do is forecast models, all of which are wrong. Show me another graph and I'll talk about it.
Well, hang on, we'll get to another, but I've got a question from a viewer I want to ask you as well. John Gleason's asks the question, so how are they going to charge all the electric cars in 2030 or 2035, whenever it is, when we're all electric, we're all clean and green? Where's the electric coming from to charge all those cars?
Sunak said in his budget that we'll have over 50% of cars on the road will be electric by 2025. I don't know what dream world he's in, by the way, because what electric cars do is just force people off the road. It forces people out of cars because they're so expensive. And that's number one. Number two, I'm looking at existing levels of power supply. If everything goes electric, if you imagine when you put petrol into your car, you've got a huge amount of energy in that tank. And you're taking that. By the way, hydrogen would need three times the size of the tank as well, by the way. So it'd be much heavier and everything, besides all the cooling problems and all that. But petrol is very dense power. And so if you had to replace all that energy with electricity, you haven't got it. There's no plan to do it. It's like they're planning for people not to have cars. In fact, they are planning for people not.
They are, yeah. That's the game.
Not like they are. And it's not going to be there. They haven't even got enough energy now for what we're doing now. I've just been offered today I'm with Octopus, and I've been offered I can be paid £3.50 a kilowatt for not using it between 5 and 6 o'clock, which is more than 10 times the price I paid to them. I'm not going to do it because you're looking at an hour when you'd have to switch off your fridges, your deep freezers, and all that. It's ridiculous. Yes, but that's what we're up to. And they're paying industry, doing deals with industry to close down the power. And so we can try and survive on the home market, on the domestic market. This is how bad it's become. Now, in normal planning, you'd sack anyone in charge of that. Anyone who got us into this situation. And especially when people like me have been drumming on about it for decades. I've been on government committees. I've been on national committees. I've been on these things. I've always been in those situations. I've always been someone who disrupted the entire thing, right? But they should be sacked.
So the key point, the key takeaway from that is to John Gleason. The point of the whole electric car thing is to get you off the road. We're not going to have this. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the energy. It's a massive assault on your freedom, actually, your liberty to drive wherever you want. But we know, as you say, Paul, I mean, really, they're signaling it. It's just that the words that they're using are.
Let me give you another statistic. When you're planning electric supply to homes, the government official level is you plan each home uses just 10.1 or 10.4 kilowatt hours a day. That's it.
Yeah.
Now, an electric car for a normal domestic thing without the big thing, without three phase, just single phase, the maximum it can draw is 7.2 kilowatts. Yeah. Which is 32 amp on a 32 amp circuit. So hold on. But that can draw, if you're loading that up, that can draw 77 kilowatts in a night. In 10 hours, you can have your whole car from empty to full. Yes. So if you come back from a trip, you're now going to draw 7 times just on that one item. 7 times, you've taken a whole week's supply for the home, according to the government figures. And what they forget when they quote that, which I've also highlighted, is it's 10.1 or 10.4 kilowatt hours for the electricity on average, but it's 32 or something for the gas of kilowatts. So in total, it's 40 kilowatts. So what I do in my videos is when they claim a wind farm can supply 1 million homes, I actually work it out at the 40 kilowatts because they're doing away with the gas. Therefore, you've got to supply 4 times the electricity just on that. So if you do away with gas government, you've got to supply 4 times what we got now. And that's without the electric cars. That's just going normal. It is a young child of, say, 10, trying to work a budget out, giving them a problem, could do better than the governments. And all the mainstream parties are doing.
Yeah, I know. Here's it. Okay, let's throw up. I see people are enjoying the education factor in this one. So let's educate everyone a bit more. Let's just bring up. I'm looking at a slide here down below, and if we can just bring it up. Yeah, Paul.
I'll explain it. Right.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Look. First of all, look to the left where I've hoofed it with a yellow thing.
Yeah.
This is just a day I took. Anyone can go, if you go into Google and say UK live energy consumption, you can get this every day. This is public. I just took it when I was making the video that day. It's got the date at the top, October the 14th, right? And it was just that day. So overnight, that's overnight where the yellow thing is. You can see the dot, you can see the pickup during the day, and the collapse into the next night. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the green one is wind. And as that is small, the gas comes up. Yes? Mm-hmm. Now go over to the extreme right, and you'll see the wind's picked up. We got a wind now. Yeah. And the gas is small. And the point is that wind at times goes to nothing. Yes? So it's all gas. Now, if you look at the other variables, and if you look at nuclear and things, you've got the nuclear there, and you've got the biomass, both of which you can predict. You can run the stupid. It's a subsidy of 800 million a year on one biomass plant. Yeah, in Drax, 800 million a year subsidy. But at least we know what we're going to get. It's like coal, only it's just much. It's the biggest emitter of CO2 in Europe. So guess who's got the biggest emitter of CO2 in Europe? We have. And so you take the biomass and the nuclear, as per this slide, and you add it up, and you get 8 gigawatts. Well, we got a 24 gigawatt base there. If you go up to the level line at night, it's around about 26 gigawatts. Therefore, we're using wind at night. And all we've got is 8 of base. That's all we've got. So now we need more gas than we've ever needed, which is why we're in panic now. But the government are doing away with the thing. And so when they build the treble wind farms, they'd have to build treble gas. It doesn't make any sense at all. There is no sense. The little sandy part at the top there is the solar panels coming in. Yes. Well, and they come in at a good time in the middle of the day. At least, they contribute. I mean, they're extremely expensive for what you get. I'm just throwing money away, etc. But, and a waste of time, really. But all I'm saying there, the only 2 solid supplies are nuclear and biomass. And the gas has to always, if you add up the blue and the green, you'll always get the same level, because that is what we have to do. And that's how stupid it is. So, I mean, it's unbelievable. But anyone can look any time to see. And all we need is a still day, high pressure over the UK and even Europe, because you get it all at once. High pressure, cold day, one of those days when it's frosty and still. Yes? No clouds. That's all we need. That's when the demand goes up and when the supply of wind goes to 0. That's all we need for the crisis. We've reduced ourselves to and as Lord Frost called it, Lord Frost, name it. There's the nighttime, by the way, which I've highlighted there. You can see it's nearly all wind. The problem with that is this: when the wind's blown too much at night, we are contracted to buy it if we don't need it. So the subsidy on wind is now just approached £1 billion to pay wind farms not to give us anything, because we can't use it at night. So a windy night is very expensive for us. And you're paying for it, public. You're paying not to use electricity. You're paying for electricity that's been switched off because they could have had this and we can't take it. There's nothing to do. Or we've actually paid Belgium to take it, which is either way. And that
Yeah.
subsidy is now about £1 billion.
Yeah,
Right?
and like these are incredible sums of money, and as you
Yes,
say, they are our taxes,
yes.
and you're talking, it's $1 billion here, it's $1 billion there.
But if you add them up, if you add the billion there and you add on the drax, which is almost $1 billion, that's 2 billion just there alone, right? It gets worse than that, believe me. But the subsidy, don't forget, they say it's 70 billion a year. Well, net zero is 70 billion a year. That's a lie. It's more like 150 to 200 in my view. And I'll do a video on that one day. But it's at 70 billion. It's enormous. We're now spending more on the energy problem than we do on the NHS. It's up with the subsidy to do and everything. It's up to 150 billion. Children could have done better.
So it is. It's quite staggering, Paul. But here's a question. I mean,
Yeah.
Again, just want to focus on net zero specifically. So, there's just no way that they can get to net zero, even if it were desirable, which it's not. So, but the policies are all about getting to net zero. Everything you're doing is doing that. So, at what point do the wheels come off this one, Paul? Because clearly, there's a reality check here.
It's the emperor's clothes. The emperor's got no clothes on. And maybe it was a child who said, Mummy, the emperor's got no clothes on. But in actual fact, it is impossible to get to net zero. At the moment, we're outputting CO2 with 2.5 times the rate that we did 30 years ago.
Yeah.
2.5 times. So we're accelerating the amount of CO2. And because everyone is now rushing to coal, etc., that's even going to get faster. Yes. So natural fact, how can anyone, that very graph you saw in my 2 minutes of all the CO2 curve with all the climate things, conferences on, that make no difference at all. I mean, they've got COP meetings that make no difference at all. And they're carrying on as if they do. And they're promising things. And it's not about climate. It's about the transfer of wealth. That's all it's about. Because there's no sense to it. I would love to sit down. My dream before I kick the bucket would be to sit down with a government minister, to actually cross-examine them on this. Because I'll tell you something, on the television, even on GB News, which is the best news channel we've got, even on that, when the Stop Oil protests are on, people are saying, some of the presenters are saying, well, and some aren't and some are, and that's fair enough. But they're saying, well, whilst I agree with the principles of what you're trying to do, the method you're doing is bad. Rubbish. They should be saying, no, the principles are wrong. By the way, the plastic you use, the machine in which you had your body scan, all of that, your car, everything, your kettle, your fridge, everything depends on oil. And to say it doesn't is mad. And then the way they present I can understand a tax where the extra profits are coming suddenly, through no fault of the company, a windfall tax. But in actual fact, they've put it up now from 65%, because that wasn't explained. They're saying it's gone up by another 10%. It was already at 65%. It was at 40. Then they put a 25% windfall. They've now added new budget 10. So they're paying 75%. We're going to need them. We're going to need the fossil fuel investment, and we're not going to get it if we carry on like this.
So Paul, just for clarity, so what our government is proposing and will happen is to tax the energy companies at 75% of profits. Is that correct?
Yes. The source energy companies, yes. That's what they've said. They've stated it. It's actually you see, they don't present you. I mean, just like he didn't mention in the budget, did he, that it's 12 pence a litre coming on fuel, on petrol and diesel.
In April, March, April.
He didn't mention it. And that was a biggie. That was dishonest. That was plain dishonest.
They've covered that one. They said, no, because I made that point and someone said, yeah, but that's the OBR. That was an OBR recommendation. The Treasury will consider that. It may or may not. So yes, so be careful that they don't catch us on that front. But put it like this, I'd be very surprised if this particular Chancellor and Prime Minister were to go against the OBR. Would you not?
They won't. They're fully World Economic Forum policy. They don't understand business. I'm sorry, they don't. The small businesses and medium-sized businesses, we really depend on. The biggest employers are being pilloried. I'll give you an example again. I'll give you some figures for your viewers. China pays domestic electricity 6.5 pence a kilowatt hour, and for industry they pay 7.6.
Yep.
Some industries here are paying 80 pence. You can't compete.
No.
We have to close down industries. So we plan a coal mine purely for the coking for steel, which is needed. And they move and try to shut it down, and the only way they can carry on would be to import it. We don't want fracking, which is, by the way, and I've gone into that in great detail, but fracking's impossible because of the law we've got on fracking. We're 32,000 times more sensitive, or 3,200 times more sensitive for the seismic shock, if you like, than they are in America. And it's 1,000 times less than, well, it's maybe more than 1,000 times less than you can possibly feel. So in Wales, where I live, we've got seismic shocks of 3 occurring on average twice a week, but no one notices them because you can't feel them at 3. That's a log scale, but I go into that in a video, So my job all the time is to take things and not assume people understand what log means. So I then have to explain it. And most of my time is spent trying to grab things and entertain as I'm explaining. That's what I do on video.
Yeah, no, and you do it very well. There's a challenge there, Paul. James says he doesn't like fracking because it could damage the water table.
Right.
Is that possible?
No. In fact, I think you may have been on one of my videos on a comment on that. I've just answered that today. I'm a water resource engineer, for a whole country for that sort of thing. No, it's not true. The fracking is 2 kilometers down. Yes, the water. Well, first of all, you'd have to be in a hell of a situation for water. It's way below the water part of abstraction, so way below it, and you've got hundreds of meters, maybe kilometer of rock above that. So no, it's not true. If it was true, it'd be stopped immediately, because no one argues in the fracking world that's the case. No one argues that if they damage things and so on, the earthquake thing is totally fake, right? It's totally fake. The gas through the tap thing is totally fake. Basically, we are going 2 kilometers down, and yes, we're injecting chemicals and fracturing the thing. It's 2 kilometers down. A lorry passing on the next road to you but one has a bigger earthquake footprint, if you like.
Another question for you. Could the UK be energy independent?
Yes. We've got, if you take 10% of our northern Lancashire, Yorkshire, that Lancashire area, that it stretches across the country pretty well. If you take 10% of that field, just 10% of the gas in the fracking, was enough there to supply the whole UK for 50 years. But the Americans are jealous of it because the quality we've got is much better than just getting 10%. So, and that's just the beginning. So yes, we could be independent. And what I advocated years ago was a nuclear base, which we're going to now. And the fact they were wrong proves this. The fact they're going to nuclear proves they were wrong to close it. The fact they did away with all the gas storage, and in fact, it was Les Truss who did away with the gas storage in 2016, closed our huge under North Sea gas storage reserve down, closed it, and now has begged the people who run it, it's gone now, and they're having to restore it. So you've got things where they say one thing, and then we have to pay again a lot more money to get it back. And that's the same with nuclear. We close it down, as per that graph you've seen, to get it back. That is, answer me, Prime Minister, answer me, any minister. Wasn't that a big mistake? Well, I could give you a list of 1,000 mistakes like that.
Yeah, but Paul, the way politics works is the people who make the mistakes after 5-10 years, they've exited the door, and we, the people, are left. Yeah. And the problems are there, as you rightly observe. And it's not just it's been under several successive governments. They've been intimidated by the climate alarmist lobby into not doing the right thing. And the right thing, well, you've talked about some of the things. I mean, one of the things I loved about whenever Trump was in the White House, and say what you will about Trump, he made the US energy independent.
Yeah, they were exporting.
And by any definition, that's got to be a good thing.
And he did it quickly. But the other interesting thing there is the only country to reduce its CO2 emissions then was America, because by fracking they got much cleaner gas out than the
Yeah,
other gas they were
yeah,
burning. And it actually reduced, as China shot up, there's a graph I published on that, as China shot up, the USA dropped. So the USA dropped their CO2 emissions totally accidentally through fracking. So when Biden comes in, what does he do? He tries to stop it all. You know, he
yeah,
can't
yeah.
stop it all because he only stopped it on government land.
Well, that's true. But I mean, the first thing he did was he closed the was it the XL pipeline? That was one of the
Yeah,
first
think about that. Instead
vandals.
of it traveling through a pipe, we now have thousands of truckloads coming down. Yes, thousands of trucks carrying it. I mean, what madness do we have here? It's all about virtue signaling and appealing, and it doesn't have to have any substance. They're all emperors without clothes on.
Yeah, and another question I had for you, Paul, and it
Yeah,
goes back just on the point you've just touched on there. So we've seen all the issues concerning the sanctions on Russia, and obviously the Nord Stream pipelines being closed and all of that. And what am I right in thinking though that the United States has become quite a beneficiary because they are now shipping across the Atlantic.
they are, yes.
Um,
But they are, yes. But can I just explain something there?
mm,
They are doing that. They are helping to save our skin. Yeah. Through frack gas, might I add, that way with
yes, yeah,
right.
yeah.
And Sunak campaigned with Truss on keeping fracking going. He did, start allowing fracking where the locals agreed. And then, as soon as the first week he was in, amongst many policies, he reversed it. Yes.
Yeah.
So he
Okay.
just goes with the wind. He's got no backbone or own.
No.
He's got no doctrines, no thing of his own. He's just a shallow man.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that but what we're doing there is we're having to compress the gas, put it into containers,
Yeah.
bring it across, and there's only two or three places in the UK that can take that. One is in Milford Haven in Wales, and they
Yeah.
have to decompress it, so they have to do a lot more work and waste a lot more energy than if we just took it out the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't make it up.
Yeah. Or stop putting sanctions on Russia and stop screwing up the infrastructure that we have anyway to get that. I mean,
The trouble is that one goes into politics. I
but
mean,
it all does.
we should never have become in any way. First of all, we should have established to have our own energy independence.
I
By
agree.
doing nuclear and fracking, we'd be totally independent of the world. That doesn't mean to say we won't trade both ways, because there are certain petrochemicals we'd import and we'd export others,
Yeah.
because some people do it more efficiently, etc. So there is that element to it. But I mean, basically, energy independence. And
Yeah.
if we go into blackouts or brownouts this winter, and time is going to be February, February,
You think?
March, really.
Yeah.
If we do that, then it's down to the government. And something else I want to explain. If we do have a proper blackout, in other words, if the grid gets over demanded as a grid and closes down,
Yeah.
you can't just open it up again. It takes weeks to open it up. Only certain stations can self-start. And when they self-start, they have to gradually start others. And then and so on. So it can take a couple of weeks to get the grid up again.
And actually, Paul, on that, do you think there will be brownouts / blackouts?
It depends on whether America and the things like that can help us. We're buying energy apparently now in from Morocco and things, but it depends. I think it's how can I put it? All I can be honest is a probability. It really is 50-50. It is the fact we are even discussing this about in a developed country.
I know.
Is beyond the damage it does to industry. I know people feel it at home when they can't cook and the deep freeze goes off, but the damage we're doing to industry with this, how can our industries compete when they're paying 10 or 15 times more than they do in China?
No, that's a good point. It's a good point.
And by the way, when they brag about reducing CO2 in the UK, all we've done is export all those industries to China, where they do a lot more pollution to produce it than we ever did. Yeah, so the more they've added to world pollution, and then they've got to import all the goods back. It's just a total pretense. But what they've done, of course, is do away with industry after industry.
Yeah, I mean, Gene Wallace makes the point. Government is all about short-term planning. It might as well have none. You're right, Gene. That is the nature of it. Over in Getter, I see Republican rockers saying that he believes that nuclear energy is the most efficient manner to retain energy independence. So I think Republican Rock. Well, Paul, what do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I do on that. Yeah, nuclear, as I say, for the base, nuclear can't react quickly. Nuclear can't come up for the peak demands and so on. Yeah, so you do need a combination of nuclear and gas. And
Yeah.
gas is quick to do it. And in Norway, and I was the water resource engineer when Norway was built in North Wales, when that was built, it was built so things like the Coronation Street tea break would put a blip into the demand,
All
and
right.
they
Yeah.
could,
Yeah.
and they could in 3 seconds meet that, right? Because it's short term. It was never meant. The pump storage was never meant to replace long-term shortages. So the one they've got planned in Scotland, which is 3 times the size of Norway, it's actually 30 gigawatt hours storage, and still about 1.7 or 1.8 or something coming out. But that one again is just to do that. So people are totally misusing these things. Totally, they're not built for that. They're built for short-term fluctuations to even out the demand. The grid has to be in balance all the time. It can't have too much power or too little power. It can't. It's got to be in balance all the time. And they're doing this balancing all the time, every second almost. And that chart you saw earlier, which you can download at any time, everyone can download it now. Just find it on Google, the live energy statistics going on, and look for that particular chart. And you'll see it any day you like what's going on. So when the wind dies down, you can see, yep.
Yeah, I was also going to say, just whilst we're still live here, to everybody. I mean, Paul, you are an oracle of so much wisdom in this topic that it is hard to encapsulate it all. But I would thoroughly recommend that everybody goes and make sure. I've told you this before, guys. Make sure you're following Paul on your YouTube channel, because again, I find that, to be honest, Paul, because we are bombarded with climate hysteria, like we really, really are. I think it's, well, between it and COVID anyway, it's been so, it's so difficult to get balance. So this is where Climate Realism by Paul Burgess, and honestly, I've watched, I think, probably just about all your videos by now, Paul, and I just find it kind of reassures me in one way, but it also disturbs me in another way, because I see all the points that you make. There's so much science in Paul's videos, but it's easily understood. It's not complex. And therefore, I would commend Paul's YouTube channel to you. I love to have Paul here on the stream because, as I said, we've gone way past our time, and I know we haven't gone. But I mean, but this is the thing, Paul. We haven't even sort of covered half the stuff that we covered. But like, that's okay, because I hope you'll come back, and
Anytime.
And I hope, Paul, we can talk in more detail in some of these other areas, because the insanity over climate is just so much that and there's not enough voices like yours around.
The very worst thing is what they're doing to children's education on it. That is the worst for me.
Yeah.
In fact, anyone now who's even 30, when they were 10, this was really going, the climate alarmism.
Yeah.
So they've been educated in it. So a 30-year-old today has pretty well had nothing else but this rubbish taught to them as fact. That is so wrong.
Yeah.
It really is so wrong. That's why I'm doing it, is because of my grandchildren. I'm determined, that they won't be sucked into this.
Well, I can see all the comments coming up on the different streams. I think people have really appreciated you talking and spending this time with us, Paul. And again, my apologies, Paul, for the tech issues beforehand. But we got through the hour. We covered, I think, there's a lot of great points there. I can see people have really enjoyed it. So listen, everybody on the streams, thank you very much for spending this last hour with myself and Paul. I hope you've got more information. As I say, if you want more, go to Paul's YouTube. You'll get more information there. And try and keep a sense of balance. Try and the COP27 circus. We have to fight back against these people, and the way we do it is through rational, data-based argument, or if you like, Science. That's how we do it. So look, everybody, thanks very much for your time. Paul, thank you very much for your time as well. And I hope to catch up with you again, Paul, and we'll have another one of these chats. And in the meantime, everyone, I hope to be back here on Wednesday evening. So catch up with you folks then. In the meantime, that's it from us. Good night.
Night.